Hey everyone, welcome to today's daily Bible reading, and today we are reading from John chapter 6 verses 1 through 21. And in the short video I did come up with a question about how when we are faced with, just like the disciples were faced with feeding 5,000 men plus, so we're looking at several thousand beyond 5,000, and they're hungry and they're in the wilderness and there's nowhere to eat, and how they had compassion for these people, but they literally had no way to feed them. So have you ever been kind of confronted by a situation where you had a strong willingness to help, where you really wanted to make things better, but you couldn't? It was almost futile. It would be like, what little you could offer is just not going to be enough, right? There's a sense of helplessness and futility about it. And when you've been confronted with that, what did you do? And, have you been confronted by that, or, with that willingness to help, but being unable to? And have you ever offered prayers for the situation or the person? And have you ever been kind of rebuffed by anyone? And how did you handle that? Because I know that I've seen it happen a lot, where you see this horrible thing that happens and all you have to offer are your prayers. And I know that sometimes it just feels like, oh gosh, that's all I have. But isn't that all we're supposed to, we're supposed to give what we can, but first and primarily pray over it. But again, we often feel like it's just not enough, and I wonder why that is. Anyway, it's just something I thought about when I contemplated the disciples and their problem. Like, they didn't rely on Jesus first, like we do. Right? We don't either. Anyway, before we begin, I'd just like to say a quick prayer. And I'd like us all to bring our intentions and our prayers and our needs and our desires and lay them at the foot of the cross, our fears and our worries and our anxieties. Jesus, we can have that perfect peace. And he promised us that perfect peace. And all we have to do is lay it down for him. Submit our will to him. Live for him. Believe in him. Acknowledge that he is Lord and Savior, and respond to that accordingly. And together we lift each other up in prayer. And so we know that the Father is in this with us, and that there is nothing that he wouldn't do according to his will. And we come humbly together and say, the Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Okay, so we have chapter 6, feeding the 5,000, and Jesus walks on the sea. After these things, Jesus went over to the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. Then a great multitude followed him, because they saw his signs which he performed on those who were diseased. And Jesus went up to the mountain, and there he sat with his disciples. Now the Passover, a feast of the Jews, was near. Then Jesus lifted up his eyes, and seeing the great multitude coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread, that these may eat?" But this he said to test them, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "Well, there is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish, but what are they among so many?" And then Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down, in number about 5,000. And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to the disciples, and the disciples to those sitting down, and likewise of the fish, as much as they wanted. So when they were filled, he said to his disciples, "Gather up the fragments that remain, so that nothing is lost." Therefore they gathered them up, and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves which were left over by those who had eaten. Then those men, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, said, "This is truly the prophet who has come into the world." Therefore, when Jesus perceived that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he departed again to the mountain by himself alone. Now when evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into the boat, and went over the sea towards Capernaum. And it was already dark, and Jesus had not come to them. Then the sea arose because a great wind was blowing. So when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea, drawing near the boat. And they were afraid. But he said to them, "It is I. Do not be afraid." And then they willingly received him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land where they were going. So, we've got a lot of miracles here, actually. So we have the feeding of the 5,000. And in my studies, it's funny because, Jesus we know that he went to pray from the other Gospels. And that the crowds just pretty much followed him, right? And so he goes from the south, which is Judea, into the north, which is Galilee. And I think that most of John's actually takes place in Judea. So this is the one miracle that, other than the resurrection and crucifixion, that is in all 4 Gospels. But this one takes place in Galilee, and a lot of John takes place in Judea. But what we have here is we have his disciples and all of these people. And what did they do? They followed Jesus. Why? Because of the miracles. He was still kind of like a sideshow, and his popularity was still growing. So as he traveled, his following kind of got bigger and bigger and bigger. But was it out of love and belief, or was it out of just astonishment and a desire for that for themselves? I mean, I can understand. I can't fault the crowd for wanting a miracle. But in this case, they had no food. They were in the middle of the wilderness, middle of nowhere. And, Philip, Jesus asked Philip, how are we going to feed them? Which was really just a test, because Jesus already knew how he was going to do this. And what did Philip do? Well, Philip did what I did. What I always do is I see the problem and I try to work out every possible way it can be solved, all the potential pitfalls and consequences and successes. And, a lot of times you look at it and I'm like, oh, I can't do this. And that's basically the conclusion that Philip came to. They had 200 denarii with them, and that was I think 8 months' wage. And that would have barely been enough to just give every single person in that crowd a bite. And then Andrew, who I love, who's always introducing people to Jesus, introduces this little boy who has 5 barley loaves. So they're kind of like bagels, and 2 small fish, which were kind of more like sardines. And what did Jesus do? Jesus told them what to do. He said, all right, just make everybody sit down in an orderly fashion. And then Jesus blessed the loaves, he gave thanks, gave that all to his disciples, and then the disciples distributed it to the crowd. And we all know it fed everybody with 12 giant baskets full of leftovers. So how many times do we, again, in the day-to-day, it's very easy for us to get caught up in the idea of we have to do all of it, our will, our ego, our need to control, right? And there's nothing, I don't think, wrong with using our skills to, to do things in the world. We were blessed with gifts and skills, but first and foremost, it's about putting God first. And these guys had seen Jesus perform miracles already. So their very first thought should have been what are you going to do? How are you going to feed them? It should have been them asking Jesus, how are you going to do this? Because I know that you can. How many times do we also do it where we try to fix it ourselves, find the problem, solve the problem ourselves before giving it to God first? And I know that, that's me. And it goes back to that question, where you want to help, you want to fix things, and you have the compassion and the willingness, but you don't have the tools that you need. You don't have the ability. You don't have the money to contribute. You don't have the skill set to rebuild. You don't have anything useful to help someone or something that went seriously wrong. And we go through all this filter of all the things we can and can't do. But the one thing that we always can do is pray. Is go to Jesus, go to God. And that's what he really wants from us more than anything. And sometimes he creates a way for us to contribute. But prayer is enough. And so when you get pushback, and we do get pushback, I think, as Christians very often when there is a horrible disaster in the world, and you see them on social media all the time, and they're like, oh, I'm praying for them, lifting them in prayer. And people get really nasty about it. And it's like, well, what are we supposed to do? What are we supposed to do? I mean, even the people who go with the love and light crowd, it's not the same, but it is their way. I wish it was God and Jesus that they did and they believed in. And I hope that one day that is what happens, that Jesus reaches them. But what are you supposed to do when there's nothing else to do? It should, in fact, be the first thing. We should all imagine what would happen if at the first sign of trouble anywhere in the world, the microcosmic, macrocosmic level, and we all instantly prayed. Imagine the miracles that would wrought. It blows my mind. But I'm just as guilty as anyone else. And then finally, Jesus, when he realized that these people wanted a very political king, they would have kidnapped him into kingship. And he wasn't an earthly king, not yet. This is not his kingdom yet. He's not here for this yet. So he goes into the mountains to pray. And in the meantime, the apostles are like, okay, well, we're going to head over to Capernaum and take the boat. And of course, because this lake, Tiberias is in it's like 700 feet below sea level. And so at night the winds come down and it can really rock things up. And so the disciples were freaking out a little bit. And we know this from the other gospels, that Jesus watches as this happens. And then he walks across the water, and so that's a miracle in and of itself. And he calms the storm, the winds, and he tells them not to be afraid. It's me. And so when they welcomed him on the boat, another miracle happens, because they were instantly brought to where they were supposed to go. And it had probably taken them hours just to go those 3 or 4 miles across that far. So for Jesus to come on and sort of instantly transport. But the beauty of that is that the apostles, the disciples, did what Jesus asked them to do. And they continued to try to get there despite the weather. And then Jesus came and took care of it. And I think that this is important between the two of these two stories, is that it's not our will. It's not even within our power. God gives us the task, and then we do what we're supposed to do. So what did Jesus do? Jesus did the miracle. We're not here to save souls. We're not here to fix anyone. We can't save anyone, right? But we are here to disciple. We are here to dish out what God is giving us. We're here to share that gospel, to spread that word, to be compassionate, to be loving, to be prayerful, to follow what God tells us to do. It says, I think it was from J.C. Ryle, here's a lively emblem of the work which is a true minister of the New Testament. He's not a mediator between God and man. He has no power to put away sin or impart grace. His whole business is to receive the bread of life, which his master provides, and distribute it among the souls among whom he labors. He cannot make men value the bread or receive it. He cannot make it soul-saving or life-giving to anyone. It is not his work, for this is not his responsible. His whole business is to be a faithful distributor of the food which his divine master has provided. And once that's done, his office has been discharged. And I think a lot of us Christians want to save everybody, and that's not our job. So there's so much. I mean, I have my notes, which you can read if you want, that are attached to this. But it's so beautiful. The other part is from McLaren. He is on the mountain while we are on the sea. The stable eternity of the heavens hold him. We are tossed on the restless mutability of time, over which we toll at his command. God is there, and he's always there. Up on the hillside, Jesus had prayed and communed with God. As he set out, the silver moon had made the scene almost like a daylight. And down on the lake, he could see the boat and the rowers tolling at the oars. He had not forgotten. He was not too busy with God to think of them. And that goes for us too. So I think that, we have to also remember that when we're in trouble, again, what do we do first? We should pray. We continue to follow God's will for us, and we turn to him first. Then everything is secondary. And I think that this really teaches us through, what the example was. Like, what is our job here as Christians? What are we truly here to do? And to obey that to the best of our abilities. And again, it's not easy. They had Jesus in front of them. They saw these miracles. For all intents and purposes, it should have been easier for them than it was for us. But we do have the advantage of the word in its entirety and to see the whole story from a distance, from perspective. So there is that too. But at any rate, I hope you have a great day, and I will talk to you later. Bye.